give a warm welcome to the hosts of The Bride of Alternate Ending.
Hello, ghouls and goblins, and welcome back to Bride of Alternate Ending. I am Brennan Klein, your ghost, and with me, as always, is your co-ghost, Tim Brayton.
You were going well. Going well.
I almost said Go Coast, which sounds like a California radio station.
I knew you were about to say that, and we were going to have such a merry time talking about what the hell that could mean, but certainly...
I mean...
You got there in the end.
Yeah, thank you. But no, having grown up in Southern California, it's probably a Christian station that makes you vaguely uncomfortable. But anyway, we are the horror wing of the Alternate Ending podcast. It's a new month. It's April. Spring has sprung, and we are springing right into talking about musical horror, which is one of my favorite weird subgenres that happens very rarely, but it's exciting to discuss.
Yeah, I don't think I realized how often it had happened when we were going over like the candidates for this podcast. It is both rare and also feels like if it were even rarer, I would not be surprised by that.
Yeah, it's less rare than you would think, but
because this is no less than the third musical horror film we've talked about on this podcast, I believe.
That is true. Our very first episode, we talked about the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and we also did Anna and the Apocalypse for Christmas one year.
And depending on how capacious you want the word musical to be, there's also Carnival of Souls.
I guess, like, because she plays the organ.
Yeah, I'm making a weak joke for all the Carnival of Souls heads out there.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they're very proud. They're on their commute right now, clapping and cheering, rending their garments at how good your joke was.
No, I mean, I called it a weak joke. So,
well,
but yes, we are here to talk about horror musicals, which I am both a fan of horror and a fan of musicals. I don't know. Well, we'll get there. I think they're an interesting thing to combine. I think they're a hard thing to combine.
Yes, very much. I am also a fan of both, so I'm always excited to plunge in. And this one, which was voted on by our Patreon constituents, is Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. That's sorry, I didn't even misspeak. But I almost said Tim Brayton instead of Tim Burton.
I literally go professionally, like in all of my academic writing, I am credited as Timothy Brayton for that specific reason.
That is a very wise move. But yeah, so we're talking about the Tim Burton adaptation of the Stephen Sondheim musical. This was a first-time watch for me across the board. I've never seen this movie. I've actually never seen Sweeney Todd staged either. So this is my first.
Okay.
I'm coming at this from a weaker angle than you as far as knowledge of Sweeney Todd.
Because I was going to ask that question, is what was your background with the show? I have seen this movie once before. I saw this movie when it was brand spanking new. In fact, I think I saw it at a preview screening prior to its release in 2007 in December, where this was pitched as an Oscar hopeful.
Oh, wow. Those hopes were dashed.
Not actually. It was nominated for 3
Oh, shit.
Oscars.
It won one. What did it win?
Art direction.
Oh, yeah, you know.
But I think they were hoping for potentially more. It did win the Golden Globe for Best Musical or Comedy. So it had a certain level of award success. But that's the last time I saw this film was in 2007 in December. I know the show quite well.
Yes, you have said that it's at least one of your favorite American theater works. Is that correct?
I would say this is it is incontestably in my top 10 musical theater musical shows. Like, I don't know exactly how I would rank it within the top 10. It might not be in the top 5, but it's certainly in the top 10. Could be in the top 5. Could be like in the top 2. But it's up there. It's a show that I love very, very much. I have seen it staged live at least 3 times, and I would say that I know the original cast album pretty much by heart. So I come at this from a level of extreme need for it to live up to some very high standards. So you and I have, I think, wholly incompatible approaches to how to entrances into this film, and we'll see what sort of conversation that leads to.
Yeah, no, because really I came prepared to talk about my experience of Sweeney Todd before seeing this. It's really limited to the episode of The Office where Ed Helms' character performs in a community theater production of Sweeney Todd. So I've heard snippets. And then also I have a very strong core memory of being in an English rhetoric class in high school and learning about internal rhyme and saying, oh, okay, so like Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street. And my teacher was like, no. And I was very upset with him for a full hour because I was correct. And that's my that's my experience with Sweeney Todd.
I think that is a very rich and robust. Well, I can see where that would also be a somewhat traumatizing relationship with Sweeney Todd.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm happy to have new things to think about Sweeney Todd. We're flushing that memory away. But yeah, so this is the 2007 adaptation. Let's get into the plot. I guess. I mean, Sweeney Todd is a long-standing character.
It is part of the fabric of English language horror at this point.
Yeah, for sure. But so we can briefly touch on it, I guess. So, Mr. Jonathan Depp is playing Sweeney Todd, and right smack dab in the middle. I think I don't have the timeline in front of me, but of his run of. I'm just going to appear in strange makeup in Tim Burton movies.
Yeah, the first time he appeared in a Tim Burton movie was 17 years prior to this. The last time was, God, did they work together? Oh yeah, Dark Shadows. So Alice in Wonderland, Dark Shadows. It's in the latter half of their movies together, but he is certainly at peak. I'm going to do a thing. Like in his sort of post-Jack Sparrow, I will hook an adjective and a famous rock star on this performance, and that will be how I approach it.
Yes, yeah, that's kind of what I meant. Sorry, yeah.
This is the heart of that.
Yeah, because I wouldn't count Edward Scissorhands as part of that that run that I was referring to. Even though he is doing that, it's a different vibe than what he was doing post Pirates of the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm, totally.
So I'm thinking of this in terms of like the spectrum of Willy Wonka through Dark Shadows.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he is Sweeney Todd. He's returned to London. He was sent to Australia. We're meant to presume, I think, right? He was
Yes.
Yeah, he was. The word is not coming to me. I'm brain farting like crazy. But it's transported, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah, he was accused of a crime he did not commit by a corrupt judge and was sent off to Australia there to work and die. He was able to escape. And this is all sort of slightly more explicit in the show, but it's most explicit in sort of the older versions of the story.
Got it. Yeah, so he's back now. The Honorable Judge Turpin is the person in question, played by Alan Rickman, who is pumping every last bit of Alan Rickman he can into this villainous role, which is always delicious. So basically, Sweeney Todd had a wife and kid. Judge Turpin wanted that wife quite badly and would do anything to get her. Basically, Sweeney Todd has returned to London 15 years later. He's learned that his daughter, Joanna, is still in the clutches of Judge Turpin. He has learned from the grotesque pie shop owner, Mrs. Lovett. The pie shop is grotesque. Mrs. Lovett is only a Tim Burton grotesque.
Mm-hmm.
But she's played by Helena Bonham Carter. She tells Sweeney Todd that his wife has taken poison and, has been lost to him for many years, essentially.
Yes. No. The idea is basically he had hoped to return home, restore what was his. He has discovered that that his wife is gone, his daughter is in the clutches of this judge, and he just sort of instantly at that point decides his sole motivating factor in life will be to get revenge on the judge by murdering him with the beautiful silver razor blades that Mrs. Lovett kept hidden in the floorboards of the barber shop above her pie shop.
Yes. And so that is his plan. I don't know if it works out in a more clear way in the stage production, but he does seem, while that is his singular motivation, he's a little lackadaisical about it. He's taking his time and just kind of waiting.
Pretty much.
But yeah, so basically along the way, he kind of gets to practice his barbershop murder routine when this snake oil salesman Pirelli, played by Sacha Baron Cohen, shows up in town, challenges him to a shave off, and then threatens him with exposing his real identity as, what is his real name? Sweeney Todd's real name?
Benjamin Barker.
Benjamin Barker. So yes, he murders Pirelli. Mrs. Lovett adopts the ward of Mr. Pirelli, who is the child. Toby, yeah.
Toby.
And
Toby Rag. With 2 G's.
Oh, that's quite British.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we've got a couple other people floating around. We've got Timothy Spall, really breaking the mold as a toady second fiddle to Judge Turpin. Never done that before.
Yeah, no, it's Timothy Spall playing a sort of rat-like, unpleasant villain character, which is unprecedented for Timothy Spall.
He's got the range though.
That's the thing. He's a phenomenal actor. But,
he is. Yeah.
The Harry Potter verse has decided this is what he will be in the popular imagination.
Oh, for sure. Well, he's Harry Potter, Enchanted, all that. He's making his money the way that British people do by going to American productions and doing nonsense and then coming back and actually doing nice things for himself.
Exactly.
But we've also got a young man named Anthony who was on the ship with Sweeney Todd, who falls in love with his daughter, not realizing that it is his daughter, and is trying to hatch a plan to steal her from the clutches of Judge Turpin.
Yes.
Anyway, all these things are happening. Also in between, Sweeney Todd and Mrs. Lovett have decided to murder their nighttime barbershop shave customers and bake them into pies and create a more lucrative pie business than what once was present.
Which is actually, it takes us basically the first act to get to sort of the core of what Sweeney Todd's legacy, like the stories of Sweeney Todd are in their most original form. He was just a murderous barber who killed his clients, stole from them, and then had his downstairs neighbor dispose of the bodies by turning them into meat pies. It takes a full act of the show, like over half of the running time, to get us to that point. It's otherwise setting up all of these sort of nest of revenge plots and who controls whose daughter and what's going on, which I find to be an interesting choice. And that is a relic of the 1973 play Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, which was then adapted into the musical. That was prior to 1973, as far as I'm aware. All the backstory about there was a barber and his wife. He had a wife, a daughter. He gets unjustly accused. I think that was all invented by Christopher Bond in 1973.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because it did feel grafted in it. There's definitely two different stories going on here. I imagine they blend better in the stage show. I don't know if you can speak to that.
They for sure do. Okay,
good, because the whole montage of him murdering clients and stuff, it doesn't feel organic to this movie to me. Watching it just doesn't feel right with the single-minded focus that he has, and this movie aesthetically has the same kind of tunnel vision that Sweeney Todd does, and just him getting so distracted with this other plot that they have to do because that's the thing that Sweeney Todd is. It just didn't feel right.
So the biggest there's a lot of little plotty changes that are made, but really it's more just a matter of taking out. Like, the movie just kind of removes chunks of the show. It doesn't really alter any chunks. The one thing it does alter is the show is more or less just a straight up melodrama. Like, it's playing things really, really big. It's presenting these kind of huge, robust, ham bone type characters, really. And so a thing that happens in the show, that happens in the movie, it's pitched differently. There's this moment where, having finally had his crack at the judge, Sweeney is about to kill the judge, but he has taken Mrs. Lovett's advice to heart and has decided to really savor this moment. And I feel like that's not super clear in the movie. That's what's going on. But basically, he's decided, okay, this is my one chance to kill this judge. I'm not just going to do it. I'm going to sort of enjoy taunting him first. And he taunts him long enough that the judge is able to escape.
Yes. Okay, yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that in the movie feels like it's not motivated or doesn't make sense, and it does. So it is stemming from that kind of thing, just the cuts that remove context.
A little bit. And so that leads him to this kind of raging, I have now decided I will get my revenge on the entire stinking lot of humanity. Big number. Every note of the song where he makes this decision, its title is Epiphany. That is not something you would know just from the movie. But no part of that was removed from the film. But it is on stage, if it's being done even a little bit well, that is this kind of big, overwhelming moment of just almost pantomime-esque theatricality, where it just is this, like, really large moment. And that's kind of what sells it. It's where the show is kind of just fully embracing its roots as this kind of, like, Victorian melodramatic nonsense. The movie, which sort of takes as one of its big stylistic choices that it just keeps making over and over again, wants to play things small. Like, the movie is kind of, okay, this is a movie, this isn't a stage show, we can't do all the big over-the-top melodramatic choices, we can't do the big theatrical choices, and that specifically ruins this moment. And I'm referring to the moment where Sweeney is, like, in the film, he storms out into the street and, like, is, like, taunting men, do you want to shave? Do you want to shave? Mm-hmm. And that moment. It is just not doing anything in the movie, is my feeling. And that's a problem, because that is the moment that sets up the entire second act.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I didn't know that there was a major difference there. But, yeah, no, that's
but
just
again, that difference is 100% tonal. Like, every piece of the song is in place.
Yeah, well, that's important, because I think that this movie is doing a lot with tone. So when it fails, it does fail on its own terms. But yeah, no, that's just played as a dream sequence that is then very visually kind of wan and doesn't do that much, because there's a much better dream sequence number later in the second act, or the second half. That makes a lot of sense, because
the first act of Sweeney Todd, the show, is kind of built such that the first thing that we hear Sweeney Todd do is declare, that London is this, like, cesspool where all the worst of humanity lives. And that just kind of barrels along and along and along until he gets to this moment where he, like, declares at long last he'll just kill all of humanity because no humans deserve to live, basically. Mm-hmm. And then it sort of ends with the big comic number to let us not have that be the kind of heavy, gloomy feeling that we enter the act with, which I think is a very good structural choice. But I don't think you get that feeling from the movie, because the two numbers in question, which are the one we've been describing, and then that very, very first number on the boat, There's No Place Like London, are both quite badly handled by the movie, in my mind. And that's where, like, those are the anchors upon which Sweeney's first act arc is built. And so if you fuck those up and the movie fucks those up, you don't have an arc, basically.
Yeah, and that is something that I was definitely feeling. I think we'll see, because this movie, it instead of kind of swinging between a more dour, somber tone and that lighter comic tone, it kind of flattens them both out into the same monotone.
So that is a huge thing this movie does. I don't want to go where I was going yet. I will go there eventually. But what was your thought about that monotone?
Well, I was going to say, I think that the second half of this movie vastly improves upon the first half, and it might be because of that flattening out. But it's just so visually flat too. I mean, this is something that I think we discussed in the Toombot episode, which is that this movie is very clearly making aesthetic choices, and I respect that it is doing that. But the choices just flat out do not function in a way that I can glean any appreciation from until at least the halfway point. It's so stolid and gray, and its vision of the world is so muted that when Pirelli shows up and he's wearing kind of a muted dusky blue, I was like, thank God I can see something in this frame. There's a color.
100%. And I do think part of why the second half works better, and I think that is just unequivocally the case, that the second half of the movie is better than the first half, which is not true of the show. I think the first act is better than the second act, which is true of the vast majority of musical theater, I'd say. But the second half of the movie, when he actually starts murdering people in his barber chair, there's a ton of bright red blood. Like, that's clearly one of the things that Burton really got excited by. It was like, the thing that brings color to this film is blood. And his concept was that blood was basically, Sweeney Todd could not express his own emotions. He could only kill people, and the killing people was how he expressed emotions. So every time we see a geyser of blood, that's meant to be the closest we get to like an emotional expression from Sweeney. And I think that all that blood being bright red does actually help sell that feeling.
Yes.
So
in the first half, I could see what it was doing. I was like, ooh, when we get blood, it's going to be... Well, I was like, it has to be like cherry red. I don't see a way for that not to be what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And it's very clear that's what he's doing to a degree. I mean, because I would say the second act, that kind of focus of composition becomes a little more diffuse. Like, I would say what I would have expected based on the first half of this movie is something more like what Steven Spielberg did in Schindler's List with the little girl with the red coat. But eventually what Tim Burton is doing here is more similar to, I guess, what they did in Sin City, which is just that certain key things have color to them, and instead of like one major central emotional thing. Sure. But that said, I liked what he's doing in the second half better. It just seemed less focused on the blood than I was anticipating.
Sure, no, and that's fair. I mean, it's as focused as the material will sort of let it be, because there's obviously still a ton of plot going on. I do think that if the overall strategy is, let's make the entire first half just this really dour, airless, monotonous field of like slate gray, so that the second act provides this really sharp contrast. And that happens, so it is entirely possible that was the strategy. That is a weird strategy, because it leaves us with a first half that is frequently dull. Like, it is a very dark movie.
It's bloodless, and not in a literal way. Like it like you're saying, Sweeney Todd on stage plays as a melodrama. It is just staid and emotionless and cool and just not that interesting.
Johnny Depp's performance here, which is one of the 3 Oscar nominations, bizarrely to me, he is playing such a reined in, like, and the idea is clearly like emotional constipation here. The idea is not that Johnny Depp is just underplaying. He's clearly part of an overall idea that this film is working with of, well, what if Sweeney is just this kind of extremely pent up, mumbly force? It's very uninteresting to me to watch over the course of an entire 70 minutes, basically, until we get to the second act, I should say, because it's longer than half, or shorter than half. But anyway, Depp's performance is just so low key, and I find it really hard to be excited to watch it because there's just no energy to it. It's just all sort of this, and it's like I get 10 seconds of that, and I have now seen the entire first half of this movie. Mm-hmm. And that to me is just an enormous film killing problem.
Oh, very much. And I mean, I think he is also kind of toning his speech to the level that his singing is. Because he's in that band Hollywood Vampires, I think, and that type of like gravelly rock is how he delivers his singing here. And I think he's just like trying to be that kind of like toned down, like, you know, and it's just not giving us anything to chew on.
Yeah, the singing in this musical, this very nearly sung through musical, moreover. Mm-hmm. Are we ready to have the conversation about the singing?
I think we should.
Because we're just gonna go straight into a hole once we start that. Sweeney Todd is a very difficult role to sing. Like, it is a technically very challenging role. Miss Lovett less so. So this is an easier time for the leading lady than it is for the leading man. That being said, I think that neither Johnny Depp nor Helena Bonham Carter can sing. Period.
I think that's fair. I would say that I had a more satisfying time listening to Helena Bonham Carter because she's at least doing a character song. Like that's how she treats every number that she has. Mm-hmm. Whereas Sweeney Todd is kind of doing, well, actually, I think the closest thing to what he's doing on screen is actually another one of our potential options that we talked about, which was Repo, the genetic opera. The thing that the grave robber narrator character is doing there, which is this kind of like goth music man patter, like that's very much what Johnny Depp is also doing, and it is
absolutely
not working.
No, it is an active detriment more often than it is neutral, and it is never better than neutral. But like, I mean, we get a very early example. I think one of the worst songs in this film is the opening number, No Place Like London, which is never a good feeling. Like, you never want your musical to start off on one of its lowest ebbs. But the song ends with Sweeney walking off stage, saying, I'm trying to remember the exact line, I don't have the libretto in front of me, but it's like, there's a hole in the world, like a big black pit, and it's full of people who are full of shit, and the vermin of the world inhabit it. And it sort of trails off. And that's like meant to be this kind of like growling statement of defiance as he leaves the stage for the first time. And Johnny Depp performs it as, there's a hole in the world, like a great black pit, and it's full of people full of shit. And it's just like, this, are you drunk? What's happening right now? And it's just so underplayed. And I do agree with you. Helena Bonham Carter is playing her role as, she's taking the numbers as sort of character beats. I think she is giving the best performance when we agree that a performance is a whole bunch of, it's what you do visually, it's the carriage of your voice, it's how you sort of engage yourself with other performers on screen with you. I think she's giving the film's best performance. That being said, I actually do like her voice even less than I like Depp's.
Ooh, that's tough. I think the thing that also helped me swallow it is, you know, because she's like leaning in on this kind of like Cockney thing, and she's already kind of playing a cartoon character. Or she's playing it big, like a stage production has room for. And I was just like, okay, I'm not hating it. Whereas I'm hating Sweeney Todd, and it has less to do with the sonic quality than just spending time with the characters.
Well, that's the thing. Depp is making a single acting choice. Like,
yes.
And like I think it is very clear that this is not like Depp came in and torpedoed this movie that was working. I think Depp and Burton agreed to this is the approach we're going to take, and it was just not the right choice. Bonham Carter is at least like, she knows what the role needs to be. I find it incredibly fascinating that you think that her performance is like big in a theatrical way. Because one of my big problems with it is that it feels so tiny, and I'm sure that's because of my familiarity with the material. She is singing a role that was created by Angela Lansbury.
Well,
and Angela Lansbury is going full on music hall with that role. Like, she is just making Mrs. Lovett this kind of big, gaudy, over the top showwoman, and and I get very little of that from Bonham Carter's vocal performance.
Oh, certainly not. Yeah, that's not that is not the impression I got from this character.
Yeah.
I was getting she's doing a snaky Lady Macbeth thing here.
Yeah, totally.
And obviously that's built into the character, but like that's what she kind of is pulling on the most. And
I think she's doing it well. I also think there are two comic numbers in this film that more or less work. The one that she has, By the Sea, is easily my favorite thing that happens in this movie.
Oh yeah, far and away. And aesthetically, that's the thing that I wanted the whole movie to be. And I think the movie could have lived with that.
And here's sort of my thing. So I think the opening part of this film, it just gets off to an incredibly rocky start, because we have that terrible Depp performance in the opening number, which then pivots directly into Bonham Carter's first number, which is The Worst Pies in London, where, I mean, my understanding of what the song even is so heavily colored by Lansbury's performance of it. But it's basically this just like big over-the-top flailing around like comic middle-aged lady being wacky in her hands, and that is just not what it is in the film. Like, I think it's fast-paced without being funny. And I look at something like By the Sea, and I'm like, how could you know that was the energy you needed to bring in there an hour and a half after we've already met this character, rather than have that be the energy that's present when we do meet this character? Like we should sweep in, and she's this kind of whirlwind of like blousy energy, and I just don't get that at all from that number.
No. Wait, so you said By the Sea works. So what's the other comic number that you say does work?
I like the trio when he's killing all the people, as he's like singing these kind of very soaring ballad lines, and he slashes people's throats, and they just like geyser blood all over his face. I think that's kind of hilarious. Okay,
no, that makes sense. The comedy of that number I was not focusing on so much, because I was just like, let's look at the blood, let's look at what's going on, let's listen to the music. Because this is the first time for me, so I was just kind of taking it all in.
Sure.
I will say one thing that was interesting to me, since we're on that particular number, because that's kind of just a montage of him murdering people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the blood spray effects when he slashes people's throats are very, very good. But they do, especially when you see 5 in a row, it does lose its potency as a special effect.
Sure.
But one thing that never lost potency for me was when he dumped the bodies down the chute into the basement, and you could kind of hear like bones snapping and cracking as they land on the floor.
That is absolutely one of the places where the movie can do something the show cannot.
Yes. And they do, which is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, a lot of the comic bits, like I could dig them out of the Sondheim lyrics even when they weren't on screen. Like the Try the Priest number, I think that is an incredibly clever number. The wordplay is really solid. They weren't delivering it so much that way, but I was at least appreciating it on a textual basis.
I mean, I'm glad to hear that. I think the lyrics in A Little Priest are fabulous. It's one of my favorite songs in the show. I don't know how it's even possible to miss that it's a comedy number as hard as Depp and the actors seem to have missed that. Because, like, it's every staging I've seen, certainly on all the recordings, it's, like, very much presented as this kind of, like Sweeney and Mrs. Lovett get kind of caught up in this let's see who can out-pun each other game. So, like, it's basically them, like, doing these two horribly corny stand-up routines against each other. And it's just so muted in the film. And, like, you have to really just, like, latch onto the lyrics because nothing really... Her a little bit, him not at all. Like, there's no sense that the characters are amusing themselves to me in the film. And that's what the song is. And I just find it wild how badly that number doesn't work for me.
Yeah, no, because it's you know, it's about them amusing themselves, and it's also, like, you know, delivering, like, their kind of callous approach to humanity, that they're able to laugh about this kind of thing, and then it's just not doing anything. But I did appreciate it.
Good.
By extrapolating. I do think the one place for me that the movies, like, or that a combination of horror and humor worked best for me was when we see Alan Rickman sentencing a child to death. That was very amusing to me.
Which I think, not a coincidence, that is an invented moment. That is not in the show.
At least, so that plus the bodies falling, at least there's something that has been added that is worthwhile, as that it doesn't make up for all the stuff that's been taken away, it sounds like, but at least there's anything.
Well, I mean, it sort of gets to my notion in general, which is, you know, theater and movies are different media. They have different needs tonally. They have different sort of, the audience engages with them in a different way. I think it is incredibly difficult to make a good stage to, or screen to stage adaptation, or stage to screen, that was it, stage to screen adaptation. So incredibly difficult that this is something I talk about all the time in person. I'm not sure that I've ever actually said this on a podcast. When I tried to make a top 10 stage or screen adaptations of stage musicals, I literally couldn't come up with 10 that I liked.
Oh my goodness.
So I think it's just very hard to do. And I think it's telling that the moments in this movie that do clearly work, and I think that the judge sentencing the child to death is certainly one of the moments that does, are the ones that were conceived as cinema, rather than trying to kind of retrofit cinema onto material that was conceived as theater.
No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, and that is frustrating because, like, there's clearly there's clearly an intention with what's going on here. It's just the intention, I think, because it's translated through source material, it's just not clicking. For the most part, look, I enjoyed watching this movie. I just think that it's not. It just is mostly not delivering what I wanted to deliver, and it seemed patently obvious, even not having seen the stage show or having talked to you about it, that it was missing something. Yeah,
no, it definitely is. And, like, I will say in its defense, I think it is clear that Tim Burton likes the show. Like, this is not coming from a place of let me ruin this show that I find boring, which I would say makes it different. And this is maybe a scorching hot take. I watch a film like Rob Marshall's Chicago, which I just actually recently, like 2 weeks ago, saw Chicago staged for the third time. Great show. I love that show. I watched the film version of Chicago, which I know many people enjoy very much and won an Oscar and whatnot. And all I feel, like, Rob Marshall does not seem to be someone to me who likes this movie or likes this show. Like, he does not seem to care for the material he is translating into a movie to me. Because he keeps trying to, like, suck the life out of it and butcher it and find these ways of limiting it. I do feel like Burton really loves Sweeney Todd. I think he's just not adept at transforming that love into an appropriate cinematic idiom.
Maybe.
If that makes sense.
But it seems like he should have been able to, but maybe this was not quite Burton at the height of his powers. This is him in his waning period. So, I mean,
I do think this is the clear highlight of Burton's waning period, especially if we take out the 2 stop motion features that he did. This is definitely my favorite live action Tim Burton film of the 21st century, which isn't saying a ton because he's not made very many good films in that period.
No, not so much. But yes. Oh, so we got distracted, but we were talking about the singing. I would also like to throw in Alan Rickman is not a singer, and that was a bummer.
It is a bummer, although they took out the judge's big solo number anyway, which is kind of perpetually done. His big solo number was actually cut in between the recording of the original cast album and the premiere of the show, or maybe it was the other way around. It was cut before the premiere of the show, but they put it back in. I don't actually know when the cast album was recorded. So they took out the judge's big solo, which I think is a bummer, but that's been kind of perpetually done with this material. Do we include the solo or not? So I do think the judge just has fewer songs to have Rickman's profoundly bad singing voice be a problem.
Yeah, so that's nice. I think, because they cast more unknowns as the younger people, it's like at least there are people present on set who can sing a song.
Mm-hmm.
Like
I will say, in a cast that is, I think, generally not good at singing, I think Bonham Carter, Depp, Rickman, Timothy Spall, I think these are none of them people who can live up to the challenges of the role. The flavorless young lady playing Joanna.
Jane Wisner, evidently.
Your favorite and mine. Her recording of Greenfinch and Linnet Bird, which is Joanna's kind of very syrupy Disney heroine ballad in the first act, I think is quite good. I think she's making a song that I don't think is a great song work quite well. So
yeah,
so
and
good for her. Good for the kid from Twilight who plays Anthony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're just So okay, does the stage show care about them as little as the movie does? Because the kind of abrupt ending of the movie doesn't even follow up with them and see what's going on with them whatsoever.
Probably the single most conspicuous narrative change that the movie makes is to gut Joanna.
Oh, okay, great.
Joanna has a considerably greater presence in the show.
Okay, that's good to know because she's this boring communion wafer of a character, but in the movie, but I was hoping something was going on. But actually, they reminded me a lot of Marius and Cosette from Les Miserables, where they're just kind of existing around the story of the musical, and then they end up kind of okay, and you're like, all right, good for you.
Yeah, and I mean, the young lovers in a show that is not about the young lovers will always kind of come off as, like, insipid, saccharine little pieces of shit. But they are... Anthony gets most of his good moments in the film. Joanna is just completely decimated as a character by the film. She has many more lines. She has more actual interactions with Anthony in the show. And the very, very end... you mentioned the end. So this is a point. At some point, we have to bring this up. There is a structuring element in the show that is completely absent from the movie, which is there are. I'm drawing a blank offhand because I don't have the numbers in front of me. If it's one version and 7 reprises, or if it's just 7 versions, but there's either 7 or 8 repetitions of what is called the Ballad of Sweeney Todd.
Which I've heard because of The Office. They sing it in The Office.
There you go. It's the opening credits music in this film. I believe also shows up in the closing credits and gets used a couple times in the underscore. You have these ghosts walk on stage, sing a little bit about Sweeney Todd, what's going on in his life, Then they walk off and we get a scene. That's how most of the scene transitions are handled in the show. Burton... Go ahead.
Yeah, you keep going.
Burton felt... He tried to film it. He at least recorded the audio of some singing. I don't know if he ever actually recorded video. Felt that it was too theatrical of a thing. Like, you couldn't make it work in a movie. That may or may not be true. I mean, there exist movies that have choral numbers.
Yeah, of course.
In the history of the musical. But let's spot him that. Let's say this was not going to work. The problem is those are built into the structure of the show at such a deep level that when you take them out, you take out the structure, and that becomes most obvious in the very end, because Anthony and Joanna actually get the last line in the show.
Wow.
Basically. Because the final version of the Ballad of Sweeney Todd, every version has been sung by these like ghosts who wander in and just kind of, wander back out. The final version, what happens, spoiler alert for the show, Toby, the young man who's been adopted by Mrs. Lovett, discovers that Sweeney is murdering people, goes insane, kills Sweeney with the razor that Sweeney's been using to kill all of his clients. It's very ironic, haha, tragedy. And then the show ends with Anthony and Joanna leading the cops down to the room where all the bodies are being ground into meat to find Anthony grinding Todd into meat. And sort of monotonously responding. The thing that, it's actually cut a little bit out of the movie, the scene where Mrs. Lovett teaches him how to use the meat grinder.
Wait, so is it Toby grinding him into meat or Anthony?
Toby, sorry.
Got it.
Toby. So Mrs. Lovett teaches Toby, here's how you grind the meat. In the show, and it's taken out of the movie, she tells him you have to put the meat through the grinder 3 times. That's what makes it, good and smooth. And he's just kind of like monotonously repeating 3 times. And that's like how it ends. And then Anthony and Joanna turn to the audience to start singing the final version of the Ballad of Sweeney Todd. And then the final version is sung by the ensemble, by the cast members, rather than the chorus.
Oh.
And that's a huge structural choice that gives all the shape that the end of that show has, but the movie does not have that because it has already decided not to use the ballad. So there's really nowhere to go with the end. It's just like, oh, he's dead now. Good night, everybody. Credits.
Yikes. and I get that it might look a little goofy if you had ghosts singing, but Greek chorus, it's a musical. Like, I mean, look no further than The Little Shop of Horrors with the street urchin girl group. This is something that can fully exist and should if it's that integral to the structure.
It is not a problem that needed to be solved for the first time when this film was being shot. Like, we already knew how to solve for this problem.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a bummer. And that's a good song too.
The Ballad of Sweeney Todd is some of my favorite material in the show.
Anyway, and yeah, because of that, because of especially in the first half, because of how bad the singing is, and because of how lopsided it all feels, I kind of, so when musicals aren't working for me, I feel like a Carrie Jarasinski, where every time they open their mouths to sing, I'm like, oh God, another one. I was like, I just was kind of hoping they would shut up at this point. Like it starts to feel wrong, which I hate because I love musicals. So I am happy that it evened out for me as it went along. But I think if it had that kind of chorus or like any sort of theatricality or playfulness to that, it would have been more engaging to me.
Well, and I think that's the bigger problem. I don't think it's that Burton couldn't figure out how to make it work, period. I think he couldn't. It made the tone too goofy isn't the word, maybe, but like unserious
or not grounded, I guess. Not
grounded. Like, we're talking about the monotony, and just to clarify, because I think we've sort of already said this, but it's worth saying again. The monotony is not a mistake. Like,
no.
They didn't like oopsie doodle, we made a movie that's just this grinding blue haze for the first hour. That is this film's strategy, is to like aggressively pursue this kind of very humorless, unsmiling, underlit, everything is heavy and gloomy and covered in a feeling of like charcoal dust. And I think it's at least possible that Burton couldn't figure out how to do that with his choruses. And that to me gets back to the question of, well, why was the monotony the thing that you wanted? But it is clearly the thing that he did.
Yeah, I think I would slightly edit the thing that you said to say that the monotony is not an accident, because I do think it is a mistake.
Fair.
But no, it is very clearly on purpose. It's very clearly the thing that the movie's doing, and it shouldn't be.
And actually, just to sort of finish off a thought that I was starting to develop some while ago.
Yeah.
It's another place where the film just gets off on the wrong foot. The opening notes of the opening notes of the show are the Ballad of Sweeney Todd, but we get the first ballad and then we get into our first number, No Place Like London. And No Place Like London begins with one of the very few like generally sunny pieces of music, which is Anthony singing about how overjoyed he is to be done with his long sea trip. And it's meant to be this kind of bright moment that Sweeney kind of sweeps into in this like dark way. But as Anthony's singing, he's looking out over this view of London that is just like coated in these charcoal gray storm clouds. And it's like, this is, if there's a single moment where you want to like show the light before you darken it down, it's here. And it starts dark.
Yeah, no, and that's a bummer, because it's plainly obvious that Tim Burton knows what he's doing in the second part. Because I think that the place where the grayness of Sweeney Todd works the best in its color scheme is where right before the By the Sea number, he and Mrs. Lovett are visiting a park. And it's them completely gray. Them and their blanket are completely like gray and white and charcoal. And then there's this kind of muted green around them. And it's the first moment of fresh air and color that you get in the entire movie. And it shows that there is an environment out there that their gloominess is interacting with, and that the gloominess isn't the entire world.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me, because he clearly knows that's something he can do with the film, because he does it Beyond the Sea or By the Sea very much functions that way. Where was that in the first 70 minutes?
It's just nowhere.
It's just nowhere.
It went wherever my interest went.
Amen.
Oh boy.
I will say.
No. Go ahead.
I was going to switch gears a little bit. So if you had to.
I'm happy to do that.
I just to talk a little bit more about the weird absence of choruses. I'm curious to hear what your response was, and also I just want to kind of give you some context you don't have. The number where Mrs. Lovett's meat shop has reopened and is a roaring success, and they sell out of pies. That is on stage. Her swinging around, singing her like little short monologues, intercut with the room full of people eating her meat pies, singing in chorus about how great the meat pies are. And when you are so assiduous about we must have no group singing, not one instance of it anywhere in our movie, they take out so much of that song, because so much of that song is the chorus, that there's not a song left. It's just like occasionally Mrs. Lovett is weirdly singing 2 lines for no apparent reason. And I'm curious if that even like registered as a number for you.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, it's so it didn't register as necessarily weird to me, because it's something that the movie had already been doing, which is just kind of being sung through and kind of not. But it did, now that you mention it, I definitely remember, because there's those parts where she keeps there's this button where she keeps telling the Toby to throw out the beggar lady who keeps showing up in the shop. And that does feel like the button to a much larger thing than what it was attached to.
That number is the great big rousing 6-minute, let's get the audience back into it, second act opener on stage.
Wow. Yeah, no, that...
Right?
No, that did not work.
No, it does not work. It is, I think, the worst part of the movie, to me.
Yeah,
also
see-
because I really like the song, so the fact that it has just been like gutted really bothers me.
Yeah. No, I mean, I actually, I do have a keen interest to check out the original cast recording now, so I will do that.
I cannot recommend it strongly enough.
Yeah, and because I do like Sondheim a lot, and I think that, like I said, the ones that weren't working for me, I could see them working somewhere somehow. So that's good to know that exists out in the world. But yeah, let's see. As far as musical numbers, okay, so is Joanna a boring number, or is Anthony just boring in this movie?
Anthony is just boring in this movie.
Okay, good to know.
I think Joanna is actually an extraordinarily lovely ballad. I think
Okay.
that the treatment of Joanna in this film suffers, in part because Anthony and Joanna do not interact until like the last 20 minutes of this film. They interact on stage.
Okay, yeah, that would definitely help. And I think it just felt a little too much like West Side Story's Maria to me, and I was like, oh, I've seen this. Okay, let's go.
Well, Sondheim writes the lyrics to a song where the title is a woman's name. He's gonna do what he does.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the very cool things about the original version of the show, if you include the judge's solo number, there are 3 different songs titled Joanna, every one of which is doing wildly different things musically and serves a completely different narrative function.
That sounds really interesting, and I'm sorry I didn't get to see it.
And how?
I think we're almost at the end of what I have to say about this, but I will say I am glad that the despicably wretched CGI of the opening credits doesn't pop its head up too much throughout the movie, although it's not there.
I am almost able to mentally categorize the opening credits as an animated sequence. And so the despicably bad CGI almost feels like, well, it's a cartoon, so it doesn't need to look right.
Yeah,
But
we can
boy.
pretend it's like they're evoking the original stage poster where it's like a chibi version of Sweeney Todd and Mrs. Lovett.
Oh,
It's super
kind of
cute.
Exactly correct.
But no, it's the opening credits. I was like, "Sweet Jesus Lord, am I trapped inside the Twisted Pictures production logo? What the fuck is going on?"
Yeah, no, that's the thing about this movie. I do love a movie that improves across its running time, and as we've said, I think the second half is quite good. Quite good, actually.
Yes,
think
I do agree.
It is not the best conceivable adaptation of Sweeney Todd in its second half, but it's a damn good adaptation of Sweeney Todd in the second half. And the opening half is much weaker, and in particular, the opening 12 minutes or so are just a catastrophe in my mind. Beginning with that just absolute mood killer of a CGI sequence, where it's just like, this is ugly. The music feels really hollowed out. It's like the only place in the entire film where Jonathan Tunick's orchestrations I don't think are very good. So in a sense, it literally opens on its worst material to me.
No, it really does. So the fact that it becomes slightly warmer, both literally and figuratively, as it gets towards the end, and that, I guess, if there had to be a long stretch of that, might as well be the beginning, so you're left feeling better than you start. But
that's the thing. Obviously, my favorite movies are ones that are good throughout, but I would much rather a movie that gets good than a movie that gets bad.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it leans in on, there are sometimes colors in the second act, and it has that kind of Guignol quality to the gore, and there's anything going on. Anyway, do you have anything else you want to say about this movie?
I could spend 5 hours nitpicking the choices this movie makes about staging, but I think I have said what I want to say on a podcast to someone who does not know the original show. Let's put it that way.
I will jump at the chance to see it if it is around me, but I live in LA, which is
that wasn't a shade. That wasn't a shade throwing thing. That was a like.
No.
Well, if I start really nitpicking the way that he blocks Anthony here, then you'll have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. So
yeah, no, that would just be boring for me.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, I'm happy to have your perspective on the film. It doesn't make me appreciate the film more, but it makes me appreciate Sweeney Todd as a piece more.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I don't know to the degree to which I appreciate the film. I do think, as I said, it is Burton's best live-action film of the 2000s. I think it's the best Sondheim adaptation. Not that that's a competitive race at all. I basically just said it's better than the legendarily horrible A Little Night Music. It's better than the pretty shitty Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and it's better than Into the Woods. Oh boy, that was
a Rob Marshall musical.
A Rob Marshall musical.
Gypsy's okay.
If we count Gypsy and West Side Story as Sondheim shows, it gets more complicated because the two West Side Stories are actually good movies. I'm not actually a big fan of the film version of Gypsy.
I can see that, but it's the only one I've seen. So
fair enough.
And I had
you've never seen West Side Story?
Time. Oh no, it's the only I haven't. It's the only version of Gypsy that I have seen.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah,
like,
I've seen.
Dude, correct that shit.
I've seen both West Side Stories.
Okay, good.
But yeah, no, I think that's gonna be it on Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. Look at all that beautiful internal rhyme. Thank you, Stephen Sondheim. Although he didn't really make that up, but
no, indeed, Fleet Street is a physical place in London that any one of us could go visit anytime we like.
Yeah, if you really want to. But yeah, that's going to do it for us. Thank you so much for listening. You can find more episodes of this podcast, more reviews from both me and Tim on alternateending.com. In 2 weeks, we're going to be swooping back in with another horror musical. We are doing the exact opposite of Sweeney Todd. We are going to discuss the 2018 Disney Channel musical Zombies, which is maybe the most excited I've been to cover a film for the podcast.
I will say this. The entire concept for Horror Musicals Month came about because a friend of the podcast, I will not say her name if she doesn't want me to, but if she gives me permission before the next episode, we will, was like, when are you going to review Zombies? Actually, she wanted me to review Zombies 2. It's like, well, I have to review Zombies 1 before I can review Zombies 2. And that kind of is what got this ball rolling. So thank you, anonymous friend of the show.
Yeah, and this will delight non-anonymous Discord user Dan, who was really in the last minutes of the Patreon poll, really pushing people to change their votes.
I love that.
But yeah, no, the Disney Channel musical is probably where my love of musicals was born, for better or for worse, with the High School Musical franchise. So I'm always happy to dip in and see whatever nonsense what havoc they are wreaking in the modern era.
I wonder if that is more or less mortifying than my love of the musicals, having probably been born more specifically from Phantom of the Opera than any other individual piece.
Huh. I mean, look, I'd say it was Disney Channel and then like Silver Age Disney, like A Little Mermaid and stuff like that. So
that's fair. I guess in my head, animated musicals go to a different bucket, but I see what you mean.
Yeah, no, that's true, which is why I didn't think about it either. But yeah, no, I think probably the first live action musical I loved was High School Musical, which I will fully stand behind. Great film. The other two, never mind. We won't talk about that. Maybe I'll talk about that probably a lot when we talk about Zombies.
That in 2 weeks, exactly.
Yeah. So, and from what I've heard, there are colors in this movie, and I'm very excited to look at colors.
If there's at least 2 colors, I will feel well used.
Very, very much. But yeah, until then, thank you so much for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.